Welcome to Love and Speak the Truth, a podcast with Sister B and friends. Might get messy, sacred to secular. Don't judge. All voices will be heard here. So listen up. We're going to explore the human experience through the lens of wisdom sharing and faith, with a worldview that might shock you, move you, even downright inspire you. Today, we get to hear the exuberant, passionate preaching style of Father Anthony Taschetta. Father Tony, as we all call him, sees preaching as a conduit, and he tells himself to get out of the way. He blends the call to make real the teachings of Jesus into the realities of our life and our interpretation of our faith. He instructs, he models the relationship of faith and practice, and we get into just a little of the struggles of the faithful of today. You'll want more. Welcome, Father Tony. So I just want to welcome you, Father Tony Taschetta, a real Italian, a real Roman person that we have here to share a little bit of time and conversation. I'm so happy that you have agreed to bring your wonderful burst of Catholic energy into the conversation. And when I say Catholic, I mean that in both ways. So welcome aboard.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. It's an honor. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we could just begin jumping in. Man, I am very excited about having you in this conversation because I love your preaching. And so let us begin with how your preaching and your teaching during these homilies invite you to bring the person of Jesus alive.
Yeah. My daddy's favorite saying was, "My son, if you can't be good, at least be loud." So rule number one is be heard. And so I when I was a little child, I had a really strong speech impediment. I had a real hard time pronouncing S's and TH's. So I went to speech therapy for years. And finally, my mother went to a teacher parent conference. And at the teacher parent conference, the teacher says, "Now, Mrs. Taschetta, where are you from?" She says, "Well, we're from 33rd and 3rd Street." And the teacher says, "Now I know why the kid's got an impediment." So I just overcompensated. Preaching to me is simply being a conduit. The hardest part of preaching is getting out of the way. I begin usually Sunday morning, even before I do my regular homilies, I'll read the following week's homily. Then I'll come back home after masses and I'll read it again. Monday, I'll just read it one more time. Tuesday, I'll write it out longhand and see what words start popping out. So on Wednesday, I'll just sit back and let it incubate for a little bit. Thursday, I'll start jotting down major ideas that I want to come out with. And then Friday, I write out notes. And then on either Saturday morning or Friday afternoon, I'll dictate it into the computer to have my notes. But here's what I want to say about preaching. I've never written a homily in my life. And I'm honest about that. I sit down and say, "Okay, what do you want me to say?" My job basically is to be a conduit. I'm a firm believer in the real presence, not just the real presence in the Eucharist, but in the real presence in each and every one of us. I think if I've got a life message, the life message is you cannot be separated from God. Ain't going to happen.
I'm with you there. Even if we want to say, "Oh, I don't believe," or "I don't think there's any such thing as a God," you can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of the presence of God. There's a divine spark in each one of us.
Yeah. When I was a little boy, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, you're too young for that, but they were quite the team. And they had a song called "You'll Never Get Away." And we go, "You'll never get away, you'll never get away, you'll never get away." And I always think that's the hound of heaven. That's God. I'll never get away. I don't want to get away. So my basic message is, okay, how do you want to use me? How can I be a useful instrument for whatever you want me to do?
So let me just ask you this, Father Tony. What would Jesus say? What would the hound of God have to say about the precarious, tyrannical times we're living in right now? There's goodness, and I know you're going to come around to that, but what would Jesus say about the times in these days?
He would look at our times and he'd say, "It's no different from my time." when Rome had their thumb on all of the Jews, when any Roman centurion could stop a Jewish boy and say, "You got to walk a mile." Now, the law said once he walked that mile, he can take the backpack that he had to carry for the Roman, put it down and spit at his feet. But Jesus came along and they said, now, when you find yourself in that kind of oppressive situation, walk a second mile. So I think Jesus would say, yeah, these really are precarious times. I mean, this morning, you were at Mass this morning, I preached on the fact that these are dark times for a whole bunch of people for a whole bunch of reasons, political, sociological, spiritual for sure. Our young people, I'm very concerned about passing on to the next generation as well as you know, but I'm sure your listeners do not know. I've got 2 adopted children and 7 grandchildren. And I just wrote to all of my grandchildren. I wrote my 7 grandchildren a letter. And one of the things that I said to them was I have a great concern that deep reality that is so deep inside of them is getting lost for all the noise that's outside of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they feel more and more isolated and more alienated. Now, thank God that they've got incredibly deeply spiritual parents, all 7 of them. I have a daughter and I have a son. I got a Vietnamese daughter and a Mexican son. And they are deeply spiritual people. So I'm not worried about their souls. I'm not worried about it, but I do worry about the fact that they need an anchor. They need something that's going to hold them to the direction that they need to go. And that anchor is that presence of the divine that will never, ever depart from them. And my big thing is, be aware of it. You can question God all you want, but be aware that there's really something bigger than you. You know, one of my favorite lines that I stole from Richard Rohr is, life is not about you. You're about life. How do you want to live that life? So are the times dark? Yeah, lots of depression. I do lots of counseling. There's a lot of real fear. And the problem with the fear is that it's being marketed. And you want to change somebody, make them afraid.
Yeah.
You want them to do what you want to do, make them very, very afraid. And there's good money in fear. Basically, I think, especially with what's going on in the internet, there's all kinds of marketing going on to make people afraid and then get them hooked into that little world, going down that black rabbit hole and never, ever getting out again.
I'm right with you there. I think listening, that inner listening that we have to do to stop and slow down the noise.
Amen.
And that's what these kind of conversations help me to do, is to say,
Amen.
listen to another perspective, listen to another bit of wisdom. I want to ask you.
Woman, you're preaching to the preacher, you know that.
Yes.
I'm in the amen corner here.
Yeah. How does a Roman Catholic priest get 2 kids and 7 grandchildren?
Well, I've always had young people live in my household. I was, from the time that I taught in our high school seminary when we still had a high school seminary. And then I was transferred to, I don't know if I've ever talked about it to you personally, which was at this time the largest rural African-American Black community north of the Mason-Dixon line in a town called Pembroke Township and a little town called Hopkins Park, Illinois. Everything I learned was at the feet of the great matriarchs down there. You know what I learned? I learned let go and let God. You get that? You got everything down.
All right now.
You got everything down, which means we're not in control, but God is. And somewhere along the line, we got to trust the providence of God. You know, when I lived down there, we had people had to choose between food and fuel. Well, my seminarians, once they were getting out of high school, would come down and live. You know, there was a lot of work to be done down there. So we had I've always had people living in my household. Always had people living in my household. Mostly seminarians, ex-seminarians. So the house has always been full of people. One day, a young man walked in, a Mexican immigrant, didn't speak a word of English. So I had learned Spanish prior to that. In '89, I learned Spanish. Way too old to learn the language. I was 46. But then he came into my life. And some people walk into your life and you know they're going to be around. When he walked in, I said, this kid's going to be around for a while. Smartest kid I've ever met in my life. Just brilliantly smart. And his name is Luis. And within 6 months, his English was pretty good. Within less than a year, his English was better than my Spanish. And he was working as a busboy. And I said, you want to go to school full time? I'll take care of you. And he said, yes. Went off passed the TOEFL, which is the English examination, went to the local junior college, taking classes in a foreign language, doing so well. I said, after the first year, I said, because he crossed over, well, in those days, crossing the border was like jaywalking. This is 1990. I said, I'm going to send you back to Mexico. We're going to bring you in here legal. And I sent him with a brief you wouldn't believe, with doctors and lawyers and letters of support and letters of education. And it was just like, you come back, you get your student visa, then you'll be legal. So he went to Mexico, got down there. He got to the border, presented his papers. The guy says, I don't even want to see him. He said, why? He says, there's no way in HE double hockey stick you're going to get in this country. He said, why? My papers are all in order for my student visa. He says, no. And I'll tell you why. 1, you're poor. 2, you're Mexican. 3, you're male. 4, you're single. There's no way you're going to get into this country. And so he called me and I said, that's a mistake. I'll fly down and get you down there. So I flew down there to Mexico City. We couldn't even get inside the embassy. So I had to leave him there, and he was just utterly depressed. And he called one day and he said, I really want to come back. So I arranged to get him back again, same way. And this time, after a while, a lawyer said, I think if you adopt him, I think we can get him legal. I said, okay. I said, Luis, you want a father? He said, who? I said, me. He went, okay, do I have to change my name? I said, no, you can stay Gonzalez. I said, although if you were Taschetta, we can get you in faster. He said, no, I'll keep my name. On the day of the adoption, it was like scales fell from my eye. On the day of the adoption, I thought I was helping a young man become legal. On the day of the adoption, I realized, as soon as the judge said, this is your legal son, I went, oh my God, I didn't adopt him to get him legal. I want kids. I want kids. I can remember being a 27-year-old priest looking out over the playground, crying my eyes out because all the children were down there playing. And I thought, I signed on to be a celibate, and I live a celibate life. I don't remember signing on to be not having children. And so God read my heart. I want kids. I want grandkids. Now, the other young man that I live with in Hopkins Park, he went off to be a missionary in Africa to the French Cameroons, got to Paris. His French was so bad that he had to stay behind to learn some more French. He lived with the Holy Ghost Fathers. Across the street was a little convent, or a little foyer, they call it in Paris, with the sister servants of the Holy Heart of Mary. They're the nuns down in Kankakee, where they have the hospital down there. And they have a place in France. He went across every day to learn the language. And the girls at the foyer and some of the novices and postulants were teaching him French. And I'd get a letter every week, dear Father, I'm so lonely. Dear Father, I'm so lonely. Finally, I got a letter, dear Father, I'm in love. And I said, Louis, I have Luis and I got Louis. I said, Louis. I said, and 6 months later, he brought his young bride to be. We got married down in Hopkins Park. She didn't speak a word of English, not a word of English. And his French was so bad, I kept on saying, this is a tribute to the power of hormones. Because they've been married 43 years now. So the marriage obviously worked. At any rate, after I adopted Louise, she said, well, what am I, chopped liver? I want a father too. So then I adopted her. And that's how I got my 2 kids. She's got 4 children, and my son's got 3. Yeah. That's how I got my kids.
When you started that conversation and the people at the border spoke to that young person that way.
Right, Louise, yes.
It's reminiscent of the way that we somehow got here, with kind of not seeing the humanity in each other, and what you talked about in terms of instilling fear in people, that those people on that side of the border, or even in our own church, place, these activities are off limits. We don't understand God's plan for us even yet, as Jesus showed us the way. Huh?
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. Like I said, you're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah. So you have kids, you have grandkids, and I reckon that that's the way that you're able to touch the reality of so many people.
Not a doubt in my mind. In The King and I, teacher says, by your students you'll be taught. I'm taught more by my grandchildren, taught more by the kids I've taught than I've ever taught them. To An, that's my daughter, one of her children, when he was 17, 16 years old, 17, junior year in high school, he said, I want to come live with grandpa. And his mother says, "Oh, I can't wait for you to get out of the house. Go live with grandpa for a year." It was not an easy year. Right after he left, one of my parishioners came up and she says, "Oh, Father, our stock in you has really gone up." I said, "Why?" She says, "Well, you were raising your." I said, "Oh, please understand, I was a total, absolute disaster." She says, "No, no, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Now we know that you know what we know." You walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, you're going to have some compassion. Now, the reason we are at each other's throats right now in our culture is we don't know each other. We
Yeah.
don't talk to each other. We
Mhm.
don't understand it. We so identify with our little tribe and our little group that we think that that's all there is, and that everybody else is the enemy. It's either black or white. It's insane. It's just insane.
And what do you do about it when you see this things playing out in churches, in our parish communities, in our families, in our neighborhoods? How do you address that?
You address it by example than anything else, and you address it by, well, and sometimes you need to bring it right to the fore. When I took over the parish in Elmhurst, they were at war. There were two people who were running the parish, and actually two women who were running the parish, and the parish was utterly divided. And after about 6 months, and they wanted me to side with one side or the other side. When I became the pastor there, I said, "No, I'm not going to go there." And I said, after 6 months, I said, we had our first parish reconciliation service, and we had both sides were there. And I said, "Excuse me, the war's over. You don't have time for this. You don't want to fight each other.
Mm.
We are so much more alike than we are different. We look at the whole MAGA world and we go, oh, no, no, these are good people." I'm always amazed at how many deeply, truly good friends I have that are at a political polarization from where I am.
Mm,
But you know what?
mm,
Still people. Much more important for me to understand where they're coming from than for me to try to proselytize or change their minds,
yeah.
because I ain't going to do it. All they're going to do is get defensive.
Oh,
But I love them. They love me. My best friend, does everything but wear a MAGA hat everywhere he goes. I love him dearly. He's my brother, you know. And we will talk politics a little bit, and he will drive me crazy. And after a while, I'll say, "Okay, this isn't going anywhere, is it?" He says, "No."
Mhm.
I says, "I'm not going to change your mind, am I?" He said, "No." "And you're not going to change mine?" "No." "Okay, let's go do something else." There's a deeper level. We've got to contact at that,
Mhm.
because this canceling out and painting in these huge broad strokes is not helping us. Yeah.
You know what? I wanted to, as you just a little touch into that. There's this thing that has gone from something meaningful to something that is absolutely darkened by the way we divide each other, and it's about inclusion. It's
Mhm.
DEI effect.
Yeah.
What is it? Diversity.
Diversity,
And
equity, and inclusion.
our whole faith is based on seeing each
Yeah.
other as brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. But
And
but but
yet,
we've politicized it and weaponized it. We've
yes.
used it as a club to hit over each other's head. And we've absolutized it.
Uh-huh.
No, no. Hey, nobody practiced more DEI than Jesus. Jesus, he praised the centurion. "I've not found this kind of faith in all of Israel." He brought in women. Women followed him everywhere. Women bankrolled Jesus. You talk about how myopic we are. I was 45 years old before I finally actually read the passage where it says, "And these women who were following Jesus were providing for his needs and his means." No, I couldn't read that before. And so what Jesus is saying it's a bigger, and even his spectrum was changed. The Syrophoenician woman, even the dogs eat the scraps. He went, oh, I guess you are included. I haven't seen that kind of faith in Israel.
Mhm.
So yeah, but when we make it a club, when we politicize it, it doesn't help.
You speak about it in a way that is passionate and possible, to bridge that sense of we're all the same. We're more the same than
we're much more the same. We are much. Hey, if each and every one of us has the divine spark, all right, if we've got, everyone has divine DNA in them. That's just not human beings, but that's dogs and cats and rocks, and that's everything. It's all of creation. If there is no divine DNA, if it wasn't created by a creator, then it doesn't exist. So if it exists, God's in it. The secret is, can I learn how to see it?
If it exists, God is in it. And that's what we need to learn as human beings.
I told you, that's my life message. You cannot run away from the depth of that reality.
Yeah. How do we get each other to come to that? I know we started with this whole idea of being sold on fears, selling fear.
We need to enter into each other's worlds. And I find the best way to enter into each other's worlds is dining with them, is breaking bread with them. When I was in Rome, they said the Romans will never invite you in. You can come meet them in the marketplace, but until you've been invited into their house, you're never really brought in. The moment you're in the house and you're having a meal with them, now you're brought in. So the power of breaking bread, the power of just, we should have a MAGA and to the left of Mao Zedong potluck together and just sit down and talk.
Yeah. There's some dis-ease in it.
Oh, a lot of disease.
The dis-ease is an environment that is combative and an environment that tends to create an atmosphere of one is lesser than, being lesser than.
Yep. Exactly. We live in a hierarchical world. And I think the great divide probably is as much, maybe even more, the class divide is even sometimes worse than the racial divide. And it seems to be those who are college educated and those who are not. That seems to be one of the major divisions today. And the ones who are not really feel resentful of those who look down their noses upon them, as that's why they're talking about the elites all the time. Well, you and I, dear, are among the elites. We're educated.
There are many MAGA and MAGA Republicans, and I actually categorize, and I don't want to get into too much of the political, but the way that there are lots of very well educated.
Yeah, there are. And I do have some serious difficulties with those who know better, but are playing the game. When you watch the confirmation hearings, most of those people know better, but they're playing the game. Because the name of the game is, how do you get and maintain power? And that's basically the game that they're trying to play. They know better. J.D. Vance knows better. All right. He's an intelligent man. He's Yale educated or whatever. Once you get into a camp, you can't really be perfectly honest. I should be able to criticize the left as easily as I criticize the right.
Let's pivot a little bit. You talked in one of your homilies about inordinate desires.
Yeah.
And that's maybe an old-fashioned
old term. Yeah, it's a real old term.
Yeah. Say a little bit about that in today's reality.
And an inordinate desire is a desire that it's a desire for control. It's a desire to be God. It's a desire to be independent. It's a desire to believe that we are cut off. We are not cut off. We are connected. It's a form of idolatry. Almost every sin can be reduced to idolatry, to making the relative absolute. One of the great absolutes today is the desire for power. And then when we have the power, then might makes right. I mean, we're gonna annex Greenland and Canada because we can. That's insane. That's an inordinate desire.
Let's just go for a minute into the sense that how would Jesus invite us back into conversation and listening to each other on a deeper level?
He took people where they were. The very best example of Jesus taking them where they were is the woman at the well. And then went and listened to them and then dialogued with them and then began bringing them. Nobody gets converted. Remember last Sunday I preached about St. Jimmy, and a fellow came to me after Mass, and he came back and he says, I voted against Jimmy Carter. I voted, and he says, but when you started telling me how he was as a Christian, and I see myself as a very deep Christian, he changed my mind. Truth is truth is truth. And the thing about Jimmy Carter is he was the real deal. What is happening with so much in, certainly not all of the evangelical movement, but with some of it is they've tasted the power, and many of them are selling their soul for the power. It was unheard of for any evangelical to condone infidelity, to condone divorce and remarriage. But now they look the other way. And that's because there's an inordinate desire there to be part of the action.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're part of the action. And of course, many of the evangelicals who, like Tim Albertson, who's come full circle and said, no, I can't do that. I can't play that game anymore because this is not what my faith teaches me. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we just wind down and ask the question that
Okay.
I ask all the people, the guests who come on the show. Maybe just share with us, the listeners, your one truth. Maybe you have many, just one.
Well, just the one truth that I'm going to say is the one truth is relationship. God is a relationship. Our God is this community that is absolute unity. And it is a community of giving, receiving, and giving back again, and receiving and giving back again. Now, when I am in communion with that relationship, that divine relationship, now that has to go outside of itself. Especially if that relationship is based in love, and it is, because we say that God is love. Now, how am I called to relate to everybody else? So relationship is everything. Yeah. My relationship with my kids, with the stranger on the street, with with the guy who's begging from me, and enter into relationship. Remember the king of the homeless? His name was Mitch Snyder, I think was his name, and he was an executive for Barry Goldwater, and he used to stand on the Capitol step begging because he was now homeless. He lost everything, and he said, "Whether you give me something or not, I don't care, but I want you to sit down and talk to me."
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. You remember Father George Clements, the black priest in Chicago? He was one of my mentors. When I went down to the black parish, George taught me everything I needed to know. And he says, the name of the game is being able to sit down and talk to somebody and know them, and know what's going on inside of them. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you so much for sharing a little taste of your preaching, a little taste of your life, a little taste of the goodness that God's given you to be present to each one of us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sister Brenda. God bless you.
God bless. And now for the wrap-up. You have just had a human experience from a spiritual being. We have so much to learn. So go forth to love and speak the truth. Ad majorem Dei Gloria.